Hi, I'm Sydney,
And I'm Jake.
and you're listening to Two for the Matinee,
Today we're going to be talking about The Night of the Hunter and
A Face in the Crowd. So, spoiler warning, because these movies are about to get spoiled.
so guess what?
What?
I have a recommendation for your mom.
Oh, okay, cool. What?
Today I watched a documentary on Amazon Prime called The Last Action Heroes. And it's a documentary about the 80s and 90s action genre.
That's right up her alley.
Yeah. The only downside is they don't interview any of the A-listers. Like they talk a lot about Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and James Cameron, but they don't interview those guys. But they get a lot of interviews from Paul Verhoeven, who did RoboCop and Total Recall. And they also have a lot of interviews with Shane Black and a bunch of other guys who were supporting cast on these action movies, or some of the guys who did the scores or like produced them, or cinematography. So a lot of people involved. Yeah, so I liked it a lot and made me want to watch all these movies again.
Cool. I'll send that to my mom. That's her favorite thing to watch.
And
Late 80s, early 90s action flicks.
And when I found it, they had the recommendations below it. And one of the recommendations that I think I might want to watch next is a documentary about, what's his name, John Milius, the guy who he wrote and directed the first Conan movie, but he also wrote Apocalypse Now. Like he's written a ton of movies that were directed by other famous directors. And they actually do have interviews with Scorsese and Spielberg and Oliver Stone and all of those guys talking about him.
Okay, so we're just going to cut right to the chase this week.
No foreplay.
No foreplay. What did you think about these movies? Because I gotta tell you, I've seen Night of the Hunter before, but I've never seen it with children, and it kind of got to me. And then A Face in the Crowd, I was like, damn, I really like this movie.
Yeah, they're out there. I watched A Face in the Crowd first. I had no idea what it was about, except when I was looking to see where it was streaming, one of the links that popped up was a link to the Jewish Film Institute. So for some reason I thought, oh, this is like about a Jew or something, but that wasn't in the movie at all. It was just because it's directed by a Jew and I think written by one. And I only know, so it stars Andy Griffith, who I only know from the Andy Griffith Show, which I remember trying to watch when I was younger and I hated it. And holy shit, I didn't realize how good.
And Matlock.
And Matlock, right? Do you want to tell us what this movie is about before we get just from your memory?
Okay, so A Face in the Crowd is a 1957 movie directed by Elia Kazan, written by Bud Schulberg, based on a short story by Bud Schulberg. Stars Andy Griffith and Patricia Neal, and Andy Griffith plays sort of a low-life drunk who's got a way with words and finds himself first on a radio station and then getting more and more influence as he weasels his way into sort of the heart of Americana after he gets himself on a TV show.
Yeah, that sounds right. But Andy Griffith, I mean, what a tremendous performance.
Oh my gosh, he was so unsettling, so sinister, so low-key grimy in this.
And that laugh throughout the movie, he has this signature laugh, which the audience loves, but it just makes him so creepy.
It's so creepy. Like everything about him is like unsettling because he's running a con. And he knows he's running a con, but he doesn't. It's just, oh man, it's great. I've never seen this movie before, and it's great.
Well, he's a bit sociopathic.
Yes, and I think that's something both these movies have in common this week is extreme masculinity and sociopathy.
It did. A Face in a Crowd did make me think of the current president.
Of course it did. It was very prescient in that way, but it was prescient in lots of ways, like the influence of television, like having a television personality to sell to the people. Because I mean, synopsis. So Andy Griffith plays this guy who's a drunk in jail, and Patricia Neal works for a radio station. And she goes around to the radio stations, or goes around trying to like interview people, man in the street type interviews. And she interviews Andy Griffith's character while he's locked up on drunken disorderly charges. And he just wows her with her personality, so much to the point where he becomes a staple at the radio station. And then because his radio station gig gets such good numbers, he is able to move up in media to becoming sort of this nationwide media personality. All the while, he's a very, very suspect character.
Yeah, I mean, he gets so big that he ends up advising a senator who's trying to run for president. And I mean, he's talking about his ratings are like, I think, 50 million viewers a
right
night.
In 1957. So that's probably yeah.
I think there was under 200 million people in the U.S. then.
Right. So he's basically having in every household.
Very influential. He kind of becomes his own victim. Isn't that one of the things that happens?
Yeah, he's the architect of his own demise.
Because in the beginning, he actually he's always kind of creepy, but his on-air shenanigans and his on-air personality, they're actually sort of appealing because he goes after people who take themselves too seriously. That's how he wins sort of his initial appeal with the audience, because they can relate to him. He goes after this one guy who's running to be the local sheriff in the town where he starts and his radio show. Then he goes after this mattress magnate in Memphis. So you're kind of almost rooting for him in the beginning.
In the beginning, until you realize that he realizes how much power he actually wields and how corrosive that power can be in the wrong hands. And his hands are extremely wrong.
And he becomes very disingenuous because in that first part, he doesn't seem to look down on his audience. He comes off as like one of them, but then by the end, he thinks they're all like these country rubes, and he can just pull one over them and just influence them however he wants, which leads to his demise because the lady that is in love with him to the end,
Marcia, played by Patricia Neal
of HUD.
Yes, but this is a much better part for her.
I don't know. I think she's I think she's got a smaller part in HUD.
That's what I mean. I mean, this part actually shows, if you've never seen Patricia Neal before and you saw this performance, this would be great. Like, you'd be like, wow, this lady's great. Yeah,
she's great in everything. But so she falls for him and he kind of strings her along, even proposes to her at one point, and then ends up running away and marrying this 16-year-old girl. But at the end, she realizes that he's just too dangerous. And so during the recording of one of his shows, she leaves the mic on during the credits when the mic's supposed to be off. And so he's just talking shit about his audience to the rest of the crew. And then the audience hears it. And that's the end of him.
Or is it? Because Walter Matthau's Mel is like, you'll be back on television. Yeah. You just won't be in the same role. You won't have as much influence as you have now, but they'll let you back on.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if they had Oprah back then, he'd just go on Oprah and apologize, get another shot.
Yeah. And it's kind of crazy how modern that movie is, how relevant it is to our day and age, even though it's made in 1957.
Yeah. I was thinking about how it has a certain feel that I guess you don't get in movies these days. And I think one of the reasons is that it's very linear. And I think linear is sort of considered boring, and things need to be like more interesting or more unique or like smarter these days. So I feel like you almost don't get that linear movie anymore as much.
Yeah, this is a straight rise and fall character study. And I just watched Dick Tracy, which is a whole nother story, but I just watched Dick Tracy before that, which is also another movie where every scene's considered. So
are you talking about the one with
the Warren Beatty one? Yes. I watched that before I watched this.
Did he make that? Did Warren Beatty make that?
Yeah, Warren Beatty was the director. But it's also a movie where every single scene, like, you can tell that everything's thought about and considered. So yeah, this is another movie where every scene, an arrangement of placement of actors and characters and lighting and everything. You can tell it's very considered, very deliberate, and it means something.
Yeah. Yeah. And it felt it felt very real. And it didn't feel staged, which is what I liked about it. Even though a lot of it is taking place on a stage in the movie, it like you kind of felt like you were there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Rather than watching a soundstage.
I think this movie aged very well. I mean, it wasn't very well received when it was released.
It also made me think of, I feel like, and I don't know, maybe this is true in other countries, but I feel like in this country, like people love that story arc of someone rising from nothing, but then like creating their own demise. Because isn't Citizen Kane about that? I've never seen it.
Yeah, you've never seen Citizen Kane?
Yeah,
What?
isn't Citizen Kane similar to this kind of? Isn't it about a guy who becomes really influential and then loses his mind?
He doesn't lose his mind, but he loses everything else.
Right.
You know? He ends up alone. But I guess we're watching that next week because you've never seen that shit.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of other movies that show that. It's interesting. I wonder what that's about. Maybe it's just part of it is people wanting to be at the top like these characters, but also sort of out of their jealousy, they want them to fail. They like seeing them.
Well, these are also really sort of questionable characters. I mean, in this movie, we have Lonesome. What's his name? Lonesome Rhodes. That's right. He's not really a good guy. He's dishonest, he lies, he manipulates. He's not a good guy, and he gets what he deserves at the end.
Yeah, what a coincidence that we watched this and Ellen just apologized for her behavior the other day.
I was thinking it was a coincidence that we picked these two movies and sort of it's kind of the same type of character between the two movies. These sort of manipulative men who take advantage and are able to, I mean, one's a straight up sociopathic serial killer, but you could see how if he wasn't a murderer, how he could end up in the same sort of situation that the character in this movie ends up in. Because he's able to charm people and work people.
Yeah, but I think they're different because Mitchum's character in Night of the Hunter is more complex.
Oh, yes, definitely.
This guy is a little more straightforward.
He admits to being simple. Like he admits to being stupid.
Until
several
later,
times.
Until he becomes big and then he thinks he's better than everyone.
Right.
I was also surprised the movie sort of zigged where I thought it would zag because when we first meet him, he's this washed up drunk in jail. So I thought his demise would come from his drinking. But the drinking was never a problem later on.
No. His demise is a character flaw.
And why do you think Patricia Neal was in love with him for such a long time? Because he's just sort of it was his charisma and like maybe her brain told her that he was not a good guy, but she was just kind of hoodwinked like everyone else. Maybe it's because he sort of had a weakness where he wanted her around because she was the only one he really confided in. And
I think that's what it is.
She's seduced by that special place that she had. She
knew him before he was Lonesome Rhodes. And so she had a special place where she was able to influence him. And let's be honest, he probably was a good bang too. And that also was a thing that had to do with it.
Probably. I think my favorite scenes in this movie were actually the ones between her and Walter Matthau.
Mine too. I loved Walter Matthau in this movie. He has a supporting role as a writer for the Lonesome Rhodes show or whatever iteration his show is having at the moment. And his scenes with Patricia Neal were so genuine and so sincere and heartfelt. Those were my favorite parts of the movie.
Yeah, maybe it's because he's sort of the straight man in the movie. He's the one that we associate with the most because he senses what's going on. He's trying to talk some sense into her. He wants to expose Lonesome Rhodes. so we can relate to this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
I
he's in love
I
with
love
Patricia
him.
Neal. Yeah, so overall, man, it's a wild ride, this movie.
I loved it. I'm gonna say when the credits rolled and it said the end, I started clapping my hands. I was like, that was fantastic.
Yeah, the ending was very straightforward, which is, I mean, it goes with the rest of the movie. But yeah, I did like it, and I love the performances. And I don't know, somewhere between a rented and a stream it for me, I'd say.
I'm gonna put it on Rented. And
That's,
the reason we picked this movie is because last week we watched Malcolm X, and I had a list of Spike Lee's top 5 movies, and this was on his top 5 movies list because the writer of this movie is Bud Schulberg, and Spike Lee is a great, great admirer of the work of Bud Schulberg. So this is on his list of like top 5 movies of all time.
yeah, I couldn't remember why we picked this movie.
I'm glad that I watched it because I've never seen it before. And I've seen other things by Elia Kazan. Like I have seen On the Waterfront, Streetcar Named Desire. One of my all-time favorite movies with Natalie Wood and Warren Beatty.
What is it about?
She's like a teenage girl and sexually repressed, and she's in love with Warren Beatty, and they don't do it, and so it like makes her crazy.
So the moral of the story is have sex or you'll go crazy.
Splendor in the Grass. Splendor in the Grass.
I've heard of that name.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because in The Night of the Hunter, one of the themes is women's relationship to sex.
Yes, and they're very, very open about it for a movie made in like 1955.
And they're very much against it. A woman should not be interested in sex.
No, she should not try to be seeking pleasure at all because it will lead to your downfall.
So tell us about The Night of the Hunter.
Oh my gosh, do I have to do it? I did the other one.
I can do it. The Night of the Hunter, directed by Charles Lawton, stars Robert Mitchum, Shelley Winters, Lillian Gish, made in 1955, and it's about a religious fanatic who marries a gullible widow whose young children are reluctant to tell him where the real daddy hid the $10,000 he had stolen in a robbery. So the real daddy is played by Peter Graves, who I know from Airplane. And Shelley Winters, who plays their mommy, I know her from this very weird movie called The Visitor. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I'm a fan of Shelley Winters. I've seen her in a lot of older movies. She's a great actress, and she was also married to Anthony Franciosa.
Yeah. So my thing with this movie is I think it has a really interesting idea and really interesting characters, but I was disappointed by the execution.
Okay, so I love the execution. I love that Charles Lawton, who I don't know if you're familiar with Charles Lawton, he has the definitive performance of the Hunchback of Notre Dame as Quasimodo. He is also one of the finest screen actors of all time. This is the only movie he ever directed.
And it shows.
Well, whatever. The only movie he ever directed, he never directed another movie after this. And I think there's a commitment to a vision. It might not be perfect all the time, but I was there for it.
Well, I don't know. Stylistically, I felt like it relied too much on sound stages, and that took me out of it.
But I think he was going for obvious. Well, it's not. I think he was actually drawing from German expressionism. So that's why he used sound stages, because there's something he was using that reliance on shadows and surrealism and sort of post-war despair from the German surrealist in this movie, because this is a surrealist expressionist movie.
Yeah, and I noticed the use of lighting and shadows, and that I wasn't a fan of that either, because again, it took me out. It felt like too purposeful. I found it a distraction.
I was fine with that. I didn't have a problem with it.
But I mean, Robert Mitchum is tremendous in this.
Robert Mitchum is hands down one of the can play some of the creepiest characters with such ease. I mean, he was scary in this movie. Unsettling scary.
And you're watching this as an adult. Imagine being one of the kids, and now he's your stepdaddy.
Right. Well, I watched this. I think I was like 13 when I first saw this movie. And so I obviously was identifying with the children the first time I watched this movie. And I mean, I don't remember much. I haven't seen this movie for a really long time. I didn't remember the details of the plot, but I remember the unsettled feeling I had watching this movie as a sort of 13-year-old. I remember the creepy eeriness of watching this movie.
Well, one thing that makes it creepy is the fact that his fingers are tattooed. His left hand spells out hate, and his right hand spells out love.
Right, which is what Spike Lee took and put in Do the Right Thing for Radio Raheem's character. He had those two rings on his fingers. One said love and knuckle rings, and one said hate. And he gave the same exact speech, almost same exact speech that Robert Mitchum gave.
Oh, see.
And Night of the Hunter. He sort of condensed it a little bit, but he's almost the same exact speech about the battle between love and the battle between hate, which becomes the sort of overarching theme of Do the Right Thing.
Yeah, when I saw Do the Right Thing, I had not seen this, so I did not appreciate that homage. And Mitchum's character here, I found a lot more creepier than Lonesome Rhodes, because Lonesome Rhodes, I mean, he has sociopathic tendencies. You kind of like get him. This guy, he doesn't really make much sense because he has a weird relationship with God where it seems like he believes that God is guiding him, but he's also doing terrible things.
He believes God's guiding him to murder these widows and whatever other sort of women he comes across.
He's almost like a proto-Joker, like a force of chaos almost.
I mean, do you remember at the end when it said he was guilty of killing 25 women?
What?
At the end, when there's like a lynch mob that forms.
Yeah, I was really confused who they were going after, because they were also yelling at the kid.
Yeah, they're yelling at the kid, but they're going after Harry, which is Robert Mitchum's character, and they're saying stuff, and he's like guilty of the murder of 25 women. So I guess they connected him to the murder of 25 women.
Yeah, because I was also I think that's where, for me, part of the execution fails, because it kind of jumps around in time a little bit, or maybe it doesn't, but like it opens with some boys finding a body of a woman in a cellar, which I guess is a woman he killed.
Yeah.
But I wasn't really sure who she was. She was just some woman that he killed at some point.
Yeah.
Some widow with money. And I think it's also does a good job. I mean, the both movies do of exposing the hypocrisy of the crowd.
Yes.
Who so easily falls for these charlatans, but then is also so quick to turn on them. And at no point does the crowd sort of reflect on like how they got into this mess, or how they're so quick to jump ship.
There's no reflection in the crowd.
Yeah, and so in a way, both of these movies are tragedies beyond sort of the micro tragedy of the story, but it's a tragedy that society doesn't learn, and it's just a matter of time until the next guy comes along and the cycle repeats itself.
Well, and they made that point in A Face in the Crowd when they told Lonesome Rhodes, like, yeah, whatever, you'll go back on TV, but it won't be the same. And there'll be some other guy who's going to take your place and do the same exact thing. And then people will turn to him. It's like, yeah, you're replaceable, because there's always going to be someone for the suckers to fall for.
Yeah, for sure. So at one point, he kills the kid's mother, and he puts her in a car and drives it into the lake. And then this local... does he have a job? I think
he's a fisherman.
Yeah, he's like a drunk, semi-functioning drunk fisherman. He finds her body, but then he's like too scared to report it to the police because he thinks they're going to think it's him.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about.
Well, there's a couple of things that I had a problem with. That's one. The other one is the fact that these kids have all this money in the dowel and they don't spend it to eat.
I thought that didn't bother me as much. I think they were afraid to use it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. in my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, they're afraid to like the son has made this like sort of death pact about not telling where the money is, so he won't use it. But at the same time, like, you're hungry. There's money here inside this doll. Just use it to eat. The other girl, the little girl Pearl, who that girl's wishy washy as heck. What the fuck, Pearl?
Well, she's very young and impressionable.
Yeah, but like the guy, she's like, "Oh, I love Daddy Harry," and then he calls her like a little sniveling whatever. He's mean to her, and she makes her cry, and then they run away from him, and then she shows up. He shows up again, and she's like runs into his arms.
She's kind of like the rest of society.
She's like the mom. She's like the mom, and she's like that girl Ruby.
Yeah. Well, and speaking with, like, I was talking about how I think it has some great ideas that I felt like weren't executed enough for me. On their wedding night, when he marries the mom, he shames her into wanting to sleep with him. And then she goes through this like religious conversion where he's preaching and she's helping him preach. And it's this very like fundamentalist philosophy or whatever you call it that they're preaching. And I was hoping that that would go somewhere, but it didn't really go beyond that. Beyond like the next scene, she overhears him badgering the little girl, so he murders her, and that was it. It felt a little aborted.
I mean, I don't know if it needed to go anywhere because we know that his religion is false. And when he gets to the house where the kids have run to and they end up with Lillian Gish, who is actually living the word of Christ, you realize, like, you know, it's sort of the contrast between the false prophet and the true prophet, or the false word and the true word. You know, he's a liar and a schemer, and she's someone out there actually living the word. So I didn't need more than that.
Yeah, I don't know. It felt like he was sort of getting influence over the community before he murdered the mother. And I was expecting to see that kind of happen. And then you could always almost set up like a clash between like this brainwashed community and Lillian Gish's character, who's more pure.
Yeah.
Maybe it could have gone that way. But then going back to what we were talking before, like very anti-sexual. So first you have the lady who works in the candy shop, right?
Oh, yeah, Mrs. Spoon.
She's talking about how like when her husband has sex with her, she just lies back there and thinks about her canning, and how a woman shouldn't want pleasure. That's for a man.
Yeah,
we have that, and we don't like her, so we're like, we kind of like dismiss that because we don't like her. But then we have Lillian Gish, who we're supposed to like because she saves the kids and she's trying to raise them right and she defends them. What does she say? Something similar.
She says a lot of things. There's like a scene where she takes the kids into the town and she watches like a couple snuggling up.
Yes.
And she's basically like, oh, look at that. She's going to fall for this line, and then I'm going to get stuck with the consequences, meaning like this girl's going to fall for this line of bullshit and then have sex with this guy, get knocked up, and then the baby's going to end up at my doorstep. She's very cynical about the whole thing.
Yeah, but I think, so there was that, but I think there was something else she said that was like very anti-pleasure. But yeah, I don't know how that relates to the rest of the story, or like what the director, the writer, what they were trying to say with that. Maybe it was just, I mean, in a way, maybe it was an implication of women's position in society.
So this movie takes place during the Depression, even though it's made in like 1955. So possibly, yeah.
Right.
No.
So I mean, like we've talked about this before, and I'm of the opinion that a movie's reflects more of the mores of the year that it was made in rather than the time
it takes place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I could see like a general sort of anti-sexual message for women in 1955.
Are you in any way at all familiar with Lillian Gish?
I don't think so.
Okay, so Lillian Gish is like literally one of the first mega stars. Like she started making movies in 1912, and I think she made her last movie in the 80s.
So wow.
So she was one of the biggest stars of the silent film era. Like I don't think we even know how to comprehend what that means in our time period, because this is like the birth of film, birth of cinema. And she was groundbreaking, and she is one of the people who actually helped develop what it means to act on camera.
That's interesting.
Yeah, so she basically spent her whole entire life in front of the camera. I think she was born in like 1893. So she basically was like making movies her whole entire life.
Yeah, so when this movie came out, she's already 60.
Yeah,
And
and
then
she's been making movies for like almost the entire century.
her last film, I looked it up, is in 1987. She's like almost 100 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a pretty interesting character, like a very interesting lady.
Did this impact your viewing of the movie in any way?
Well, I already knew that, like before, because I've been watching old movies since I was like 8.
Look at me getting cultured watching movies you recommend.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sydney.
You're welcome. Anytime.
Yeah, so this one I'd say is also somewhere between stream and rent for me. Like, there's a lot of things I liked about it. It's super creepy. Robert Mitchum was excellent. The other adult actors are very good. And then there was some things that were kind of a letdown for me.
Yeah, I'm gonna put this as a rented as well. I really love this movie. I watched it last night, and I woke up this morning thinking about it.
No surprise.
So yeah, it's a rented for me.
Cool. Did you watch anything else this week?
I watched Shirley on Hulu, which I really loved. It's very out there, different, kind of made me feel the same way as Nocturnal Animals. So I don't know.
Why is that?
It unsettled me.
Okay.
I was unsettled by it, and I kept thinking about it, and I wanted to delve deeper in it. So then I went down the rabbit hole of like film analysis and like thought pieces on the movie, just like Nocturnal Animals. And then I watched
Wait, so Shirley, it's about a writer.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's
about the writer Shirley Jackson, who wrote like Haunting of Hill House and
oh right.
We Have Always Lived in the Castle, if you've seen that or read that. Yeah.
I think everyone has to read The Lottery at some point.
Oh yeah, The Lottery. The Lottery. Yeah.
Which is super creepy.
Yeah. So it's like, and it's not a biography because it's based on a novelization of like a time in her life, a fictional story, like built around a certain point in her life. But it's really good. I liked it a lot.
Is she a weird person?
I don't know if she's weird in real life, but the way that Elisabeth Moss plays her, she's a very strange lady.
Well, Elisabeth Moss usually plays weirdos. So.
Yeah. So I really liked it. That was it unsettled me. I kept thinking about it. I'm going to revisit it later. I haven't had time this week. So I watched that. So I'm going to give that a rented. If you don't have Hulu, if you have Hulu, I definitely think you should check it out. Okay. And then I watched Lady Bird. I got some feelings on that. I'm not going to really go into that right now.
All right. You think it over.
Yeah. We can talk about it later. We can have a thing and where we talk about it. But yeah, I'm not a fan of Lady Bird. And like my whole thing, it's like I'm watching Lady Bird. And I know it's critically acclaimed and Oscar nominated. And I had never seen it before. And I'm watching it, and I'm just like, I'm watching female white mediocrity on display. And it's boring, and it's predictable, and everyone around her is incredibly interesting. All her friends, her family, I want to know more about them, but her, do not care at all.
You couldn't relate to her at all.
It wasn't even about that. It wasn't even about that because I can watch movies about people from like Iran in 1976 and find it relatable, but I don't know. I really need to think about it harder. I did not like it though. And I thought it was completely overrated.
It's been a long time since I've seen Lady Bird. I saw it when it was in the theaters, but your description of her, the main character kind of being a dud, is how I feel about Greta in every acting role that I've seen her in. She's always this very like blah dud character that for some reason some guys are interested in. I don't understand why. And she's like always like suffering. It's like, because you're a dud, you're not interesting. Okay, litmus test. What did you think of Juno?
Oh my gosh, same thing. Yeah, I was like, this makes me think of Juno, but this is worse.
See, I thought Juno was worse because Juno was like much more actively annoying with her cool way of talking and just like her like weird
Her
attitude.
self-aware, her
Yeah.
pop culture self-awareness.
It's like nails on a chalkboard for me.
Yeah.
Why did you watch Dick Tracy?
Jeff put it on, and he was like put on a movie, and I came in the room and it was on, so I watched it.
I remember watching it as a kid and not thinking it was very good. Did you like it?
That's how I was when I was a kid too. I don't. Let me be honest. I didn't think the acting was that great. The only thing I really enjoyed about it was the set design, because it was very. I mean, they made this very concerted effort to make it look like a comic book, and that drew me in because they worked really hard at that, and you could see that.
Did it kind of feel like almost a shitty Tim Burton Batman? Because it came out around the same time, and I feel like there was something there.
Yeah, it was very much sort of a derivative of Batman.
Yeah. All right, so what are we watching next time?
I think we should watch Citizen Kane. You haven't seen it.
Okay.
I mean, that's like fundamental right there.
Okay. And my pick, since it's my birthday, I'm picking one of my favorite movies of all time. A movie that I love so very much. It's called Heat.
Okay, so I'm Sydney.
And I'm Jake.
Join us next week when we take it back to the fundamentals with Citizen Kane and then Heat.
Try not to be just another face in the crowd.